Hello, my name is Kama Pierce, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Levine Museum of the New South. Last week, we had a special program, What is it going to take?, with a wonderful group of panelists who are different stakeholders in our community discussing that very question in light of all of the activities that have been going on in our country the past couple of months, but actually for many years. And we did not have the time to get to the comments and questions that were scrolling throughout the evening. There were over 500. And we so appreciate everyone's engagement and the conversations that were happening amongst yourself. But the staff decided that we should pull out a few of those themes and those questions and try to address them for you at this time. So you're going to hear from different members of our staff, and hopefully you will join us for our next program and keep the questions and the engagement going. So here we go.
I'm Catherine Hill. I'm President and CEO of Levine Museum of the New South. And the question I'm answering comes from Mary Lynn Anderson. She asked, what are the top 3 things the general public can do? From my perspective, number 1 is vote. And number 2 is get out the vote. And for some of us, that may mean convincing the young people in our lives who are understandably skeptical that their vote counts, that it matters, and that our futures are at stake now more than ever. The third thing, from my perspective, and now I'm talking to white people like me, is get educated. Learn the history that we weren't taught in schools, because if we don't understand that history, then we don't understand the problem. And if we don't understand the problem, we can never become a meaningful part of the solution. Thank you for asking.
Well, I'm going to try to answer the question of why so much money is going to the police in the budget, and what can the city council do about police policy? What authority do they have to control the policing policy? Well, to answer that question, the reason why so much money goes to police, I'll speak specifically about Charlotte, is because city council has approved that money. And to answer the second question, what can city council do about police policy? We can do a lot about police policy. We made that clear this past Monday night by creating a new overall city policy that says Charlotte City Council, along with the manager, will scrutinize and adjust all police spending and policy implementation. The reason why that has not happened before is simply because there was not the political will to do so here in Charlotte and in most places around the country. We exist in a council manager form of government. What that means is that the inner workings of our government are run by the city council in coordination with the manager. You have to think of government as a business, because they are set up with business in the same business structures as that private companies share, with some nuances to them, right? We are a corporation. We are a governmental corporation entity, as is registered with the Secretary of State. And there's basically a circle around this. Our stockholders are the voters. And those stockholders, those shareholders, we each get one equal share in a democracy. And those shareholders choose their boards of directors in a council manager form of government. That is the city council. And the city council is basically, they run the corporation. They run the business of the city. We enact policy. We control spending. But we are not the ones that run the day-to-day operations. We hire the city manager. Another name for a city manager would be a CEO, a chief executive officer. That CEO hires departmental heads, and the tree kind of goes down from there. So the head of the water department the head of the transportation department, and the police chief, for instance. So every year you go through a budget process, and that is the number one piece of policy, the number one public policy tool that the city council has to exert its authority over our government. And when the city council exerts its authority, that is technically the voice of the people. So that is the voice of the people. So every year there is what's called a budget process. The fiscal year starts on July 1st of every year. And between July 1st and about the end of January, each department head starts curating the next year's fiscal budget. The budget is basically, it requests all of the resources and tools that those department heads deem necessary to fulfill the mission of that department and the responsibilities of that department. Every year, at the beginning of the year, somewhere between the end of January, beginning of February, those department heads submit, including the police chief, submit their budget requests for the next fiscal year. The city manager compiles all of those budget requests and determines what should be presented for council. So this year's total budget was about $2.55 billion. There are a couple of different types of entities. I don't want to go too deep into enterprise funds versus general funds, but the general funds are what we the main tool city council can use to do things in the city. Enterprise funds are services like water that don't get paid for through tax dollars. They get paid through the fees that you pay the water company, like the airport, the fees that you pay for when you buy a ticket, and there's an airport fee, and when you spend money in the airport, that's how the airport gets run. It doesn't get run off of sales tax or property tax dollars. Our property tax dollars go into our general fund, and that's how we pay for things like police. So when the manager compiles all of this budget, he hands it over to the city council, and we go through a process over a number of months where we can scrutinize budgets, but we really don't usually get into the intricacies of our departments. Again, we say we hire the professionals that know best. And when it comes to policing, there has not been the political will to kind of scrutinize and say, hey, what are you using all of this money for? So, for instance, we spend a lot of our time on city planning, economic development, and housing and neighborhood services. Those are very important, right? And they deal with issues of affordable housing, access to transportation, the ability to end segregation. Very, very, very important stuff. But we only spend about $20 million, somewhere between $20 and $30 million, I believe, between all of those three departments. We spend $290 million on police in the upcoming fiscal year, but we rarely ask what that money is for and tell them, if there's something that we don't like, and not allow that. So on Monday night, this past Monday night, June 8th, we adopted a budget, but we also put a new policy in there, which basically says that from Monday on, it is not just the possibility for city council and the manager to scrutinize and adjust police spending and police policy. It is the duty for city council and the manager. So this is a job now that is part of the job description that hasn't been done before. So we will be setting up a process that allows for the comprehensive inspection of police spending and police policy. Again, this is something that could always have been done, but we are doing now. But now we have a way that we can insert the people's voice into that July 1st to end of January process, where we are determining what the mission is, what the responsibilities are, and how we are going to approach it with the spending on the tools that are necessary, and the policies that will guide the behavior of those that are given the responsibility of ensuring community safety. So when we had this program a week ago, we did not have this tool, but now we do. So um, I'm looking forward to the hard work that is going to be necessary to make the proper adjustments, and I look forward to the community's impact on what community safety actually looks like. This is a model. What Charlotte City Council did on June 8th is a model that can be transferred to any council manager form of government. The reasons why city councils have not inserted the people's voice into the vertical the vertical operations and accounting of our city departments is not specific to Charlotte. This is something that has been people have been unwilling to do or get the political will to do all over this country. So hopefully we are taking advantage of this moment and doing something that will not only make the city of Charlotte safer, run more efficient, and give more opportunity to people, but we will get this right, and we will be able to show other communities how to do the same thing here in North Carolina and all over the country.
Hello, I'm back again. We had one question that the staff actually asked me to answer, and it was a question involving qualified immunity and the history around that qualified immunity concept. You can't tell from the way I bunted the question last week as the moderator, but I actually have a law degree, so I will do my best to kind of explain this concept. It's actually a pretty recent idea that came out of case law. It's not found in our Constitution, and it came about in the end of the 60s. Before that, citizens could sue police officers for some of their conduct, but this rule, qualified immunity, was given to public officials, including police officers, to protect them from being sued by people as long as they do not violate the constitutional or statutory rights, and that's the standard. This was most recently, I think it was 2014, challenged by 2 Supreme Court decisions. One of those cases is pretty on point with some of the activity we're seeing here. It involved a high-speed car chase. The deceased, Mr. Rickard, was driving that car. The police ensued with a roundabout, crazy high-speed chase, and it resulted in Mr. Rickard's death, with him being shot, I think it was 14 times through his car, and his daughter sued the police officer. Justice Alito upheld the immunity for the police officer, saying that he could not be sued in that instance, and that given the dangers around the high-speed car chase and the danger it was to the community, that he was justified in his actions. But you will see that this is going to be a hot topic around all of the conversations we're having right now around the police, including the funding, defunding of police, the training of our police officers, the hiring of our police officers. You can be rest assured that this qualified immunity concept is definitely being talked about, will be challenged, especially since it is based in case law and prior to 1967 didn't exist for police officers of protection. So keep reading about this and following this development. And thank you for that question, Hunter.
I'm Dr. Willie Griffin, staff historian of Levine Museum of the New South. And so I'm here to address a few comments and questions about the lack of, I guess, inclusive education materials or teaching of a more inclusive history. A few people chimed in during our event and talked about how U.S. history is taught in public schools, and they're recalling their days in these public schools in the 1970s and 80s. Another person suggested that, or correctly responded that the truth must be taught in our schools. And so I often try to remind people when we think about the growth and support of white supremacy, it was more than just a violent, it was more than violence that was used to prop up white supremacy. We have to think about the Daughters of the American Confederacy and their organizing around making sure that young white children would not be taught the legacies of the true legacies of the Civil War, and how much slavery was a central issue in the war between the South and the North. And so in doing that, they propped up this idea about the lost cause. And you have to think that over the next 6 to 7 decades, really uninterrupted, the textbooks focused on teaching a more palatable history of the South and the Civil War. And so really embedded, deeply embedded in this lost cause was this idea that slavery was a benevolent institution, and that slavery actually benefited those Africans who were brought here. They were taken care of, they were given food and other kinds of things that they would not have gotten otherwise. And so that couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that the reason that we don't understand the reason that this country is in the position that it's in right now is that for those decades that I mentioned, so many Americans and generations after them were taught a perspective of American history that was just really one-sided. And because America is such a diverse place, other perspectives, other people's histories have never really been taught in the schools. And so it's interesting that I'm reading a novel that was written in 1946 right now, and it's called the I believe it's called um, American Democracy Reimagined or something like that. But it's a novel, and it talks about how the only way to get true democracy, to bring about true democracy in this country, is for Americans to learn about slavery and the things that African Americans have done or contributed to help build up this country. So it's really important, and this is again was written in 1946, and we really don't get to a period where we are learning about African American history until really the 1980s and 1990s. And so if you think about African Americans who actually entered the academy to begin to break down this idea about slavery being a benevolent institution, that doesn't happen until the 1960s. So African Americans are entering these major universities like Yale and Princeton, and they're taking up people like, I'm thinking particularly John Blassingame, who talks about the institution of slavery. And he's breaking it down that slavery was much more than a benevolent institution. So you have to think in the 60s, while scholars are in the schools studying this and writing about slavery, you have the civil rights movement being waged in the streets. So it takes time for those kinds of research and scholarship to actually trickle down into the American public mainstream. And so everything that we understand about slavery is just starting to come out for the mainstream public, although it's been widely known by scholars in the university settings for a very long time. So it's going to take the work of scholars to work with local institutions to talk about how slavery existed in various locales, because slavery happened in different ways. I mean, there were different experiences all across the country wherever it existed. So I think the best book on, I guess, a more integrated version of American history is Howard Zinn's People's History. But again, has not been widely adopted by public school systems. So that it is important, it's imperative that we learn more about African American history. There was also in the 60s, after the Brown versus the Board of Education decision was passed down, and it took about a decade for schools to be integrated. And so I always have to remind people that when integration occurred, you also had a situation where we integrated the schools, but we did not integrate curriculum, and we did not integrate teachers and administrators. So once these students went into these integrated classrooms, they often lost important advocates who were advocating on their behalf. And Du Bois mentioned that he thought that it was wrong. We had every right, African Americans had every right to advocate for integration and the breaking down of segregation, but we had no right to throw these defenseless children in harm's way, where their spirits would be dampened because teachers didn't understand anything about their culture or their history, and they didn't make any effort to try to teach those things.
My name is Marcus Kimbrough, and I'm Director of Development for Levine Museum of the New South. Thank you for joining us on this evening to, again, just help us to have this conversation around what is it going to take. Without you, we can't do the powerful work that we do at Levine Museum of the New South. Our mission is to connect the past to the future to realize the promises of a New South. And you, as members, as donors, as friends, as supporters, are critical to us completing our mission of creating a New South. And this conversation goes a long way in us being able to do that. Your support, once again, is invaluable. Other ways that you can help support us are to come visit us when our doors open once again here soon, very shortly, fingers crossed. Also, you can support us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Levine Museum, keyword there. Also, you can text to give. You can text New South to the number 243-725. Again, you can text New South to the number 243-725. Or finally, you can go onto our website, museumoftheNewSouth.org, and click up in the right-hand corner, click on the word donate, and it'll instruct you further how you can help support us. Again, we thank you so much for joining us on this evening, and we're just thankful for you being a part of us and helping us continue to bring this important dialogue and this important information to you. Good evening.
Thank you for spending the time with us. Thank you for your engagement and your questions. The staff at Levine Museum of the New South will continue to bring history into the conversation, and we hope that you do join us in the future as we continue on this journey of learning, questioning, and hopefully rebuilding. I did get one question through email from a person who had attended the program last week, asking me what was the name of the person who wrote the quote that I read at the end of the program. That was actually Brian Stevenson. He is the attorney who has put the death penalty and the lynching history and modern lynching that's occurring in our country in the forefront of conversations for all of us. And he did write Just Mercy that was made into a movie. I think it's available now, but I'll read that quote one more time for all of us to think about as we continue learning and asking the hard question. The greatest evil of American slavery was not involuntary servitude, but rather the narrative of racial differences we created to legitimize slavery. Because we never dealt with that evil, I don't think slavery ended in 1865. It just evolved. Have a good day, and thanks for being with us.